Here we go. So tonight's talk is an interesting idea, and I talked about it a little bit at the end of class a couple of times over the last few weeks. It is the second thought. So when you hear the term or phrase second thought, you usually have the idea of almost second guessing yourself, or I'm saying something, or I have this idea, and then I say, on second thought, let me do this. And my idea is basically the same thing. It's nothing incredibly complicated, but the specifics of it are going to be interesting. So don't turn off the talk right now if you're watching. If you're here, don't turn off your brain. Keep listening. So I had this thought because we experience life in general in a way that goes like this. We move about our lives and our days, and we bump into something. We bump into, an event, or somebody yells at us, or we physically bump into something, or whatever happens. We bump into something, and we have our initial reaction. The initial reaction is your first thought. The initial reaction is, ow, I bumped into that thing. Or, I can't believe that person is looking at me that way, they must hate me. Or whatever your initial reaction is, that is what we're going to call your first thought. And most people, including me still sometimes, and definitely for most of my life, your first thought leads directly into your second thought, which then just leads into a bunch of thoughts that you're not controlling. And so it goes like this. Ow, I bumped into that desk. Who's the idiot who put that desk here? It must have been Catherine. She's always putting stuff where it doesn't belong. I should really fire her. Blah, 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 blah. And going on and on and on. And then eventually, I realized that would be stupid. I can't believe I ever had those thoughts. That was just a complete waste of the last 30 seconds. And we go about our lives just like in segments of wasted time where we're thinking about things that we know are ridiculous. And it all comes from that thing that happened that takes you into your first thought and then the train of thought that comes after it. And so I propose to you that, first of all, you can change what your first thought is, what your reaction is. And we talk about this a fair amount in practice. The more you practice meditation, the more you practice mindfulness, the more that you basically reprogram the way that your mind responds to things, the more likely you are to have a more useful first thought. And it's really difficult to do that. So when I say the more that you meditate, I mean like we're talking about a long, long time and a lot of real effort in reprogramming what the initial reaction is. Because the initial reaction is that. It's a reaction. It's like, for me, I'm walking down the street and somebody steps on the back of my shoe by accident, and I have the initial reaction of wanting to turn and punch him in the face. And I am the least violent person that you will meet, and I mean that. I'm less violent than all of you and all of your friends, and I know I do martial arts and punch people for a living. But I abhor violence. I don't like the idea of punching anybody at all. Yet if somebody touches my shoe when I'm walking, something very deep inside me gets full of hatred in an explosive way. And it's a bizarre thing. I have no idea where it comes from, but it happens. And that is kind of the way that a lot of our first thoughts are. It's like our lizard brain. It is our evolution, and it's not just physical things like that. Of course, we have evolution that serves to keep us safe against physical harm, but our brains don't have the ability to distinguish very well between physical harm and emotional harm, mental harm. We basically treat things the same way. So when somebody is doing us verbal harm, somebody yells at us or even looks at us funny, we usually have an instinct, something very primal kicks in, and it's there to keep you alive. It's like fight or flight. And while you might have a very difficult time or an impossible time changing what that initial reaction is, you can certainly slip some kind of pause there in between the first thought and reaction that you have and the second one. So Seafood Brown talks about this, you have stimulus and response. And we really want to be able to get a pause in between the stimulus and your very first response. And I'm going to say that if you can't get it there, then you're going to go stimulus, response that's in your head, pause. So stimulus, pause, stimulus, first reaction, pause, and then your second thought. So your second thought is where we want to have some kind of an interruption. And that is something that you can probably do fairly quickly, at least compared to reprogramming your lizard brain. So I've done this. Not completely, but I'm pretty good at it now. And there are lots of things that, especially as a kid or as a young adult, I used to respond to and send myself down this rabbit hole of thought and self-talk that I don't do anymore. I don't do that with those circumstances anymore. And it's because I spent all this time just reprogramming and thinking about, like, how do I actually want to be in this situation, and inserting that pause there. So what I've noticed works really well is if your second thought is something that sounds like this. But is that really the case? Or wait a minute. So if somebody looks at you funny and you have the first thought, that person hates me, and your second thought is, but really? Then you can decide what your third thought is going to be. You might decide, this is probably not actually what I think it is. It's actually this. And from this pause, you can, decide, I'm going to go down this path or I'm going to go down this path. That's not usually what we do. Our brains come up to a fork in the road and they're just going in this direction. You get up to a fork in the road and you can stand there and look at it and decide, do I want to go this way or do I want to go this way? But most of us, our brains are like, we're already leaning in one direction and we're booking it. So as soon as we get to the fork in the road, it's impossible for us to go anywhere other than that way. But you create the pause and you decide. You might decide, if the second thought is, wait a minute, is that true? You might then decide, yes, it is, actually. My first thought was correct, and this is what's happening, and this is how I'm going to take the next little section of my life and spend it thinking. And this, creating of a pause and taking control over the train of thought is so important. And if you look at it like with our physical practice, there are plenty of times that we practice kind of doing both. So you want to be able to not think. You want to be able to not pause and be very decisive in the instant. And obviously, if somebody come here, man. Yeah, you okay with being on camera, right? Great. So if somebody is punching at you and you go, wait a minute, let me think about this. You just got punched in the face. But if you've trained your body over and over and over again to just respond, where she throws the punch and I just move out of the way, that becomes my initial response. But there are plenty, and you can see how that has been kind of an evolution in and of itself. Because at first, if you come in here for your first class and somebody were to throw a punch at you, your first thing would be to go like this. You shut your eyes and you squint and you maybe turn away, and none of that helps you not get punched. You just got punched by an invisible fist. So I've trained myself by doing this over and over and over again, and also training my mind to be in this more empty state, something close to mushin, to no mind, so that then when the punch happens, I can just respond in the way that I've trained my body. But you also want to be aware of attachments. So, for example, if she throws this punch and this is the only thing that I can do, and then she starts throwing this punch but then turning it into a hook punch, and I'm still stepping into it, that's attachment and that's bad, right? It's like, you can sit there. And I'm going to use other ideas that I hope you can visualize without me having to have a partner up here. But it's like when you're grappling with somebody. You're rolling on the ground and you get in your mind a technique. This is what I'm going to do. And in that moment that the thought enters your mind, you usually become attached to it. You become attached to it mentally, which then makes you become attached to it physically. And this is what I was talking about this morning after class. It is kind of amazing how our practice works this way, where we get this instant feedback in our bodies that tells us that our minds are attached to something, because we actually can feel tension. And you can feel that your breathing is not the way that you want it to be. And you can feel unable to flow from one technique to the next. You feel your mind is unable to go into all of the other options. And this is what attachment does to us. I'm thinking I'm going to do this sweep, and my partner stops it, but I'm still thinking about sweep. I'm attached to it. And so when my partner gives me, they take away this technique, they take away this sweep, but they give me all of these other options. I can't see those options because of my attachment. And I in most cases, literally cannot physically do the other things because my body is in this direction and it's stuck. So instead, what we train ourselves to be able to do is to stay relaxed and flow with our partner's energy. And we feel their movement going this direction and we flow with that. If I fill up my consciousness with this idea and this technique, it's kind of like, I'm running towards that fork in the road leaning over and I can't turn very easily. I'm stuck. But if I'm just relaxed mentally and physically, I feel my partner go this way and I go right with it. I feel my partner stop and go the other direction, I go right with that. And it is being in this flow state or mushin, and I'm always ready to go in any direction whenever possible, that allows us to then therefore be instantaneous and direct with our next technique, rather than always kind of like having to stop and think about it. So being relaxed, being unattached to whatever that first thing, that first instinct is very important. And I was talking to Catherine about this earlier today, and she was spitting all kinds of science at me, and even she didn't fully know what she was saying, but it was interesting. What did we decide? So the first thought, your instinct, is like this, the amygdala. This is your lizard brain. This is like your fight or flight, and it's very instant, and it's very attached to going in one direction, right? And then when you're able to create a pause, and you were saying that is this from a study or just something you heard from somebody say? Some study shows that if you take a deep breath, right, and then it helps to engage your prefrontal cortex. I said it right that time. So engaging your prefrontal cortex is then what kind of gives you the option to choose what you're doing, because the amygdala is not good at weighing options. It's good at making these split-second decisions. And you want to be able to do that. You've got to be able to. But you also want to be able to, if it's something that's not literally physically threatening me right now, I want to be able to take that pause and get up here into the other part of my brain that's able to, create options and weigh choices and make a decision that is more helpful for me. So simply just taking a deep breath. And that's shouldn't be a surprise to us, because we practice breathing all of the time, and we always go back to focusing on the breath. And in Tai Chi and in meditation, of course, it's very important. It's imperative. So just the simple act of taking the breath puts you in this other mindset. It puts you in this other part of your brain that then it can allow you to choose. Do I choose to continue going down this path? Or do I choose to change my mind and go down this path? It allows you to be unattached. It allows you to be in the moment, be present, be relaxed and flow with whatever life is throwing at us. So I'll give you a couple of examples of second thoughts that I have created for myself that work. So I said one of them that I know really works is saying, but wait a minute, is that really what I think? Another one is, you guys have heard me talk about one of my goals this year is to do something uncomfortable, something that makes me uncomfortable every day. And so very often now I will find myself in a situation where there is something to be done or a choice to be made that makes me uncomfortable. And in that moment, my first thought is, I'm not doing that. That makes me uncomfortable. And my second thought is, nope, wait a minute. You said you were going to do stuff that makes you uncomfortable. So then I get to decide, all right, I'm going to do this thing. And I can decide powerfully to do that. Or I can decide, yeah, but I already did something that made me uncomfortable, so I'm just going to keep going this way. And it's my choice. But there is that moment where I'm able to decide. And I've kind of like thrown a little pause in my mental, a monkey wrench of a pause into the, I don't remember the rest of that phrase, whatever. There's a pause there, which is important. Another one that works is, oh man, I wrote it down and it's gone now. It's on the calendar on the phone that you're recording with, so we can't look at it. Well, let's do this. Have any of you guys been able to create something like this that is something that you've basically programmed your mind to go in this direction? And it doesn't have to be something very similar to what I've been saying. It could be a very specific instance, and this is oftentimes where it comes up first, is I've got this specific thing that I've been doing in a way that doesn't work for me, and I've done it years and years and years this way, and I've decided, no, I got to interrupt this with something else. So I've reprogrammed my brain to go into a different direction. Has anybody done anything like this? Yes?
Well, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you mean, but I drive a lot in LA, and I used to be a thrower of things. I yell and gesture and
You gesture. The Seafood Brown calls that the highway salute.
Yes. Yeah, and even, I'm ashamed to say it, the urge to chase somebody. I got it, and I've done that a couple times.
So let me catch everybody else who's listening to this. So you used to drive and just basically be furious. Something would happen. I'm ready to chase them. I'm flipping them the bird. I'm yelling stuff.
Any slight.
Uh-huh.
Especially an egregious one. And
That's right.
I remember you saying at some point that somebody said that they pictured the lights of the car in front of them as the eyes of the Buddha. I don't know why, but that really stuck to me. And it kind of converted into just this thing where I tell myself to take a breath, and then I have this sort of, not real specifically thinking about the Buddha, but somewhere it's vaguely in there, and I just think, okay, now I'm not responding like that anymore, and then I think a little story about what might be going on in that person's life that made them do that.
Yeah.
And I feel compassion for that person, even though they're a jerk. And
You still kind of slide that into the end. So this is brilliant. This is what I'm looking for. So I used to drive and have maniacal thoughts in my brain when somebody cut me off or whatever. Somebody's tailgating me, anything. I mean, and it's something different for all of us. And it is driving in LA. There are plenty of opportunities to feel like this. And yeah, I heard this. I stole it from somebody else. I don't remember who said it, but you're sitting in traffic and you see the taillights in front of you and imagine that is the eyes of Buddha, and Buddha's like blinking at you. And when you see Buddha in the car in front of you, it kind of takes you out of that realm of thinking where it's like, I want to do physical harm to this person. You're just, it takes you out of it for a moment, and then you get to insert in there whatever you want to. And I definitely love this idea of empathizing with them and choosing to think what might be going on with that person that they are driving that way? What could be going on? I always think there must be a pregnant person in that car and they're going to the hospital right now. But I also remember with myself, it was not that long ago that I used to drive like that all the time. In fact, every once in a while, I might actually do something that's just like that. It's much less often than it used to be, but I might do that. And so I can empathize with whatever is going on with that person, even if it's completely in my head. And that kind of leads you into a different way of being. It is less stressful. It is a healthier way to live. To be able to insert that pause, that second thought. The second thought in this case being, those are the eyes of the Buddha blinking at me. What would the Buddha want me to do right now? Would the Buddha want me to rear end this car or not? Probably not. And so that's something that, and it could be, it sounds like it may have been this way for you, where you heard something and it was kind of like a paradigm shift for you, and it kind of started happening automatically, but you could do that or something like it, just with some work. And maybe I got to put a sticky note on my steering wheel that reminds me to breathe, or that reminds me to see the eyes of the Buddha and the car blinking its taillights in front of me, so that I kind of enter into that more readily, or I'm keeping that somewhere in the back of my mind, so when this thing happens, then that becomes my second thought, and that becomes where I'm able to take my mind with this. So that's a great example, and you guys can, I'm sure, think of something like that. And if you've never had an experience like that, this is the time. This is what this talk is for. So start to be aware of, it could be something that repetitively, I experience this and I go right into this frantic kind of reaction, and it just kind of boils over, and this is the way that it always is. It could be something that is just more of a general sense of, I want to create this pause. So one thing that has stuck with me for years and years was kind of similar, actually, where at least it started partially like a paradigm shift, and it was hearing Sifu Brown say, happiness is a choice. Because I would have something happen to me, I would have my first thought, which is something negative, and then my many other thoughts after that would just go into negativity, and I would just be in there, and sometimes for hours at a time. I would just obsess and just roll over these things over and over again in my mind. And I heard happiness is a choice, and I recognized that, wait a minute, that means that thing that happened, I can choose to be happy about that if I want to. And it might mean that I literally construct some other way of looking at it, or it might just be that I decide, what, I'm choosing to be happy about exactly these circumstances, whatever it is. And that kind of led me into recognizing I can choose to be however I want to be about any of these things. A lot of that was just work reprogramming. A lot of that was through meditation, sitting and breathing, and being able to recognize the thought. And then this is also something I was talking about today to a student's question. It's not like I have the initial thought and I have to crush it and stop it. This is the way that we usually tend to go about something like that. You want to just redirect it. And so I describe this when I'm meditating. I try to imagine it's like the thought's coming in this ear, and I just let it go right out the other side. I don't have to stop it. I don't have to force it out. I just kind of get out of the way and let the thought continue on its merry way. I'm not holding on to it. I'm not attached to it. The more that we resist something, the more that we're kind of attached to it in a way. So when you practice that in meditation, and you have the thought, you're able to let it go in whatever direction you want to, and you're certainly able to decide, I have this thought, and now I'm going to spend some time thinking about that. Again, that's not what we want in meditation, but it is just the act of being aware of the thoughts, being aware of that pause between this thought and the next thought, being able to choose. How do I want to feel about this? How do I want to proceed with my mind? What is the road that I want to go down with this train of thought? So let's practice that today as we meditate. And instead of, trying to have specific second thoughts, let's just recognize the thought when it happens, and then treat it in that way. Just invite it. It comes in your front door, and just invite it right out the back door without having to get angry at it, because all of that is basically like your second and your third thought and your fourth thought, all of that resistance to it. So your second thought is just, I had that first thought, my second thought is, okay, goodbye, and just let it go. Let's work on that. Sit comfortably.